As we get closer and closer to the 2024 college football season, I wanted to highlight 15 more players who I think will break out. There are two definitions of breakout to me. One, they literally come out of nowhere and become a really solid player, and two, they go from an unknown or underrated player to the complete mainstream. We're going to have examples of both of those types of players today, as we're going to go through 15 more players who are going to break out for the 2024 season. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and meet those 15 different players. So the first guy I want to talk about is Thomas Castanos. I did a video on him a couple of weeks ago, but coming out of Georgia, he ended up having a huge high school career. He threw for nearly 8,000 yards and had 4,000 more yards on the ground and became a 3-star recruit. Many schools wanted him to switch to defensive back, but he decided to play quarterback at UCF and became a 3-star player. After just 1 year at the Knights, he would transfer to Boston College, where he took over in the second half of their first game. He became the first Boston College quarterback to ever pass for over 2,000 yards and run for over 1,000 yards in the same season, as he had 2,248 yards and 15 touchdowns, and also ran for 1,113 and 13 scores. Castanos is a guy who I think will break out into the mainstream this year and could have a coming out party pretty early on. He's a dangerous weapon at the quarterback position and a name that you need to know. One of the more interesting players on this list is going to be Teo Johnson. He ended up coming out of Idaho Falls, Idaho, and was seen as the number 2 player in the state. That doesn't really mean much in Idaho though, as he was only ranked as a 3-star prospect. He played quarterback in high school, was a state champion sprinter, and also played on the basketball team. He arrived at Utah as just a 3-star player and played in 5 games as a wideout in 2022. This past season, Teo would start 12 games on the defensive side of the ball and log 33 tackles, a fumble recovery, and had 5 pass deflections. Utah was really good at producing star talent and finding underrated gems, and it looks like Teo Johnson is literally the next one in line. If he has one more big season, he could play his way into the NFL draft, and some think he could be a first-round pick if all goes according to plan. The next guy I want to talk about is Oscar Delp. Georgia has been pretty good at the tight end spot over the last few years, and Delp has been waiting for his time to shine. After Brock Bowers has been the guy the last 3 seasons, Delp will take over. He ended up coming out of the city of Cumming, Georgia, and had a huge career while he was in high school. He ended up having 59 catches for 900 yards and 8 touchdowns as a senior, and became the number 2 overall tight end prospect in the country. He arrived at Georgia in 2022 and saw reserve time in 13 of the 15 games. Then in this past year, he actually started a ton of them. He caught 24 passes for 284 yards and 3 touchdowns, and I think this year, with Bowers gone and with Ra Thomas getting suspended, I think he'll have an opportunity to play more. He should be the next great tight end for the Georgia Bulldogs and could play his way onto the NFL radar if he has a big enough season. The fourth guy we're to talk about is CJ Daniels from LSU. He was an unknown coming out of high school, as well at Parkview High School, as while he was a senior, he ended up catching 93 passes for 1,411 yards and 15 touchdowns, but was not really highly recruited. He ended up going to Liberty and started 2 games as a freshman, and then started 6 more games as a sophomore. He had 37 catches for 629 yards and 7 touchdowns in 2021, and then he was limited in 2022 due to injuries, but then as Liberty broke out, he had a huge season. He caught 55 passes for 1,067 yards and 10 touchdowns, becoming an All-Conference USA receiver. He ended up becoming a top 10 receiver in the transfer portal and committed to LSU. They just lost both Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, so the Tigers are looking for the next great receiver to step up, and I think CJ Daniels has an opportunity to become the guy. According to a lot of insight, he's probably going to settle in at 2 or 3, but I'm actually really excited for Daniels and think he could be the top option for their new quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. Up next, we have a guy who has quietly put up huge numbers over the last few years, but no one ever talks about. That is Seth Henderson. He is currently the starting quarterback for the Memphis Tigers, and he actually follows in a line of pretty good quarterbacks such as Riley Ferguson, Brady White, and most notably Paxton Lynch. No one really talks about him much though, as I said. He ended up being the son of a big-time high school football coach as he went to Denton Ryan, and in total had over 7,000 passing yards and 79 touchdowns. Hennigan was a 3-star recruit and actually took over right away starting. He threw for 3,300 yards and 25 touchdowns as a freshman, and in 2022, he got even better. This time he threw for 3,600 yards and 26 total touchdowns, and then this past year, he threw for nearly 4,000 yards and 37 total touchdowns. Hennigan is a guy who should be in the mainstream and probably could have gone to a bigger school if he got into the portal, but he's hoping to lead Memphis to be the top team in the group of 5 this year, and Hennigan is a name that you need to know. Up next, we have a guy who's also like Hennigan, as he is definitely going under the radar. His name is Dylan Thaman. After becoming a 3-star recruit coming out of Westfield, Indiana, Thaman was completely going under the radar. He ended up having 246 total tackles in high school, but no one really wanted him. He decided to sign with Purdue, and as a true freshman, he was absolutely insane. He became the Big Ten Newcomer of the Year, was the 3rd-team All-Big Ten selection, a 24/7 Sports True Freshman of the Year, and PFF ranked him as one of the best returning secondary players in all of college football. This was after he had 74 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 6 interceptions, and 2 pass deflections. The craziest part is Thaman still has 2 more years to play, but for now, he's a name you need to know, and he could be a big-time NFL draft prospect in a couple of years if he can keep this up. Every year, there are always a couple of quarterbacks who start the second half of the season and blow up. One of them is Fernando Mendoza. After Sam Jackson got hurt in week 1, Mendoza would take over as the starting quarterback for the Cal Golden Bears. Coming out of Columbus High School in Miami, Florida, Mendoza was going under the radar. He ended up throwing for 1,100 yards with 11 touchdowns and 4 picks his senior year, which honestly really aren't that great of numbers, but many people saw potential in him. He ended up being a 3-star recruit and signed to play with Cal, and at 6'5", he had a lot of potential if his staff could just get the most out of him. He didn't end up playing at all his first year, but in 2023, Mendoza ended up throwing for 1,700 yards with 14 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. The best part about that is it all really came in the back half of the season, as he only started 8 games for the Golden Bears. He ended up leading them to a bowl game and 3 straight wins to finish the regular season, and as Cal goes over to the ACC, Mendoza is a name that you should probably keep tabs on. Up next, we're going to go over to the Big Ten and talk about Zachariah Branch. USC just lost their 2 wide receivers to the NFL in Taj Washington and Brendan Rice, and it looks like Miller Moss will have a new quarterback in Zachariah Branch. Coming out of Bishop Gorman High School in Las Vegas, he became an absolute superstar. In total, he had 753 yards on 45 catches his senior year, but had one of the most insane athletic testing scores we've ever seen. Branch was listed as a 5-star recruit, and in his USC debut, he had 4 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown, and would go on to have a okay season. He ended up finishing with 31 receptions for 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. USC is decently loaded at the receiver spot, but it looks like Zachariah Branch will be the next big name to come through the Trojans program. He has all the tools and all the potential in the world, and he's a guy who I think could explode to 50 catches for over 1,000 yards and probably 10 touchdowns this year. We'll just have to wait and see though. Up next, we have another wide receiver from the Big Ten, and that is Harrison Wallace III. Penn State has produced some decent receivers over the last few years with guys like Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, and Jahan Dotson, but in the last 2 years, they've desperately lacked a big-time name. Harrison Wallace is looking to be the next big thing, as while he was coming out of high school in Montgomery, Alabama, he was pretty insane. He ended up catching 27 passes for 696 yards and 7 touchdowns as a senior, and was listed as a 4-star recruit. He ended up going to play for Penn State, where so far he has been a little bit limited. He caught 19 passes in 2022 and 19 more in 2023, but according to all sources, he's been crazy. I've been looking at a lot of articles, and Penn State defensive back KJ Winston recently said, quote, "He's been playing off the charts. He's likely going to be the #1 receiving option for the Lions this fall, and Drew Allar really needs a player like him." They also have Julian Fleming from Ohio State, but Harrison Wallace III could be the next great Penn State receiver that comes out of absolute nowhere. Another name that you need to keep an eye on is going to be LeVeon Moss from Texas A&M. A few days ago, we found out that Texas A&M running back Ruben Owens is going to be missed for the season, so when I predicted LeVeon Moss to be the breakout player in my Aggies preview, it looks like it's going to be right. Coming out of high school, Moss was a huge deal, as coming out of Louisiana, he put up big numbers. He finished in total with 1,800 yards and 23 touchdowns, and was also one of the top sprinters in the state. He was a 4-star recruit who signed to play with Texas A&M, and as a true freshman in 2022, Moss would carry the ball 27 times for 114 yards and a touchdown. This past year, in a running back by committee approach, Moss ran the ball 96 times for 484 yards and 5 touchdowns, and now it looks like he's going to be the feature back for an Aggies team that I think could be sneaky good. Mike Elko is a much better coach, they have a great quarterback in Connor Weigman and a decent offensive line, so Moss could be a name that breaks out for 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. At least that's what I'm projecting. Know the name. One of the most popular breakout players for 2024 is going to be Avery Johnson. The Kansas State Wildcats have been led by Will Howard the last few years, but despite him transferring to Ohio State to be the starter, Kansas State could not wait to get Avery Johnson on the team. Coming out of Wichita, Kansas, he would go to Mays High School, where he blew up in his 3 years as a starter. He passed for 2,600 yards and 20 touchdowns and ran for over 1,000 yards and 22 touchdowns as a junior, and became a finalist in the Elite 11 quarterback competition. He would then win the Kansas Gatorade Player of the Year award after he had an astronomical 2,700 yards and 29 touchdown passes. He is listed as a 4-star recruit and one of the biggest signees in Kansas State football history. As a true freshman, he showed insane potential as he had 6 touchdowns against Texas Tech and also started and had 3 touchdowns in their bowl game. Avery Johnson's getting comparisons to Colin Klein, and honestly it is for good reason, but I don't want the expectations to be too high on him. Johnson has the perfect height, he's super quick, has a great arm, and has all the potential, but can the staff get the most out of him, and can he hold off from all this extreme pressure? That's what we'll have to wait and see, but Avery Johnson could be one of the most fun quarterbacks in college football this year if he does things right. Ohio State has become a wide receiver factory over the last few years. They've had guys like Jackson Smith-Njigba, Chris Olave, and most recently Marvin Harrison Jr. Everyone expects Emeka Egbuka to be the number 1 receiver on the team this year, but who will be number 2? Well, that's likely going to be Carnell Tate. Carnell Tate is a rising star at Ohio State, as coming out of high school, he was a 5-star recruit, as he blew up as a freshman and only got better and better throughout time. Tate would arrive at Ohio State, and then this past season, he ended up catching 18 passes for 264 yards and a touchdown. Brian Hartline is super high on what Tate brings to the table, and with his insane athleticism and what he did in high school, it looks like he's going to be the next great Ohio State wide receiver. Jeremiah Smith is also a good candidate to break out, but for now, I'm going to go at Carnell Tate. What's crazy is I've been doing YouTube for so long that I remember when Jaden Blue was the number 1 running back in his high school class. I remember when he committed to Texas and he was considered a 5-star recruit. He ended up going to Klein Cain High School in Texas and put up monster numbers. In 2019, he had a monster campaign in which he ran for 1,600 yards and 16 touchdowns, and that's why he was a 5-star. He decided to commit to Texas, but eventually fell to a 4-star in the class of 2022. Blue would play a little bit as a freshman in 2022, running the ball 15 times for 33 yards, but this past year would end up breaking out a little bit. He had 65 carries for 398 yards and 3 total touchdowns, and also got an opportunity to play big reps against number 2 Washington. He scored a touchdown in that game, but also had a costly fumble. Originally, I thought Jaden Blue would be the number 2 running back on the team, but with CJ Baxter getting hurt for the year, Jaden Blue is now the candidate to be the top running back. Texas's running backs coach has been one of the brightest young stars in college football, and I'm sure he's going to turn Jaden Blue into a monster. And following the track record, Jaden Blue could be the number 1 running back in the 2025 NFL Draft, as Bijan was number 1 in 23, and Jonathan Brooks was number 1 in 24. If there's one guy who I really trust to develop wide receivers right now, it is head coach Kalen DeBoer. He just sent 3 of them into the first 2 nights of the 2024 NFL Draft, as Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, and Rome Odunze all went in those first 3 picks. Jeremy Bernard is the next guy up. Coming out of Liberty High School, Bernard was a gifted player. He was named the Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Nevada as a senior, as he ended up catching 53 passes for 956 yards and 12 touchdowns, and was also great on the ground. He ended up becoming a true freshman at Michigan State in 2022, catching 7 passes for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. After that, he transferred to Washington, where this past year he started 7 games, catching 34 passes for 419 yards. Bernard was seen as the next great Washington wide receiver, but with DeBoer taking the job at Alabama, he could now be the featured weapon in this Crimson Tide offense. I'm super excited to watch Bernard and see what he'll be up to this season, and he could play his way into the 2025 NFL Draft radar. Okay, so the last guy on our breakout list is quarterback Miller Moss for USC. Coming out of the state of California, Moss was always a big-time quarterback, and eventually when he was a junior, he got offers from nearly every school in the country. He became a 4-star recruit and joined Jackson Dart in the 2022 class for USC, but after Clay Helton was fired, he still decided to stick around with new head coach Lincoln Riley. Despite them bringing in Caleb Williams, Moss would end up being the backup over the last few years and has patiently waited his turn. He finally got his opportunity against Louisville in this year's bowl game, and Moss had a crazy game. He ended up throwing for 372 yards with 6 touchdowns against the Cardinals, and Moss showed that he has unlimited potential going into 2024. USC is looking for a guy to replace number 1 overall pick Caleb Williams, and Miller Moss could be that dude. He seemingly has the it factor, has been studying for 3 years now, and knows Lincoln Riley's system. The sky is going to be the limit for him, and while I do think he'll be really great, there will be some time for him to adjust, and Moss should be one of the better quarterbacks in college football this year. So yeah, today we talked about 15 players who I think are going to break out for the 2024 college football season. But I want to know your thoughts now. Who's a guy that I missed? Who is your favorite player on the list? And what other topics should I cover on the channel? Before you go, don't forget to also leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about 20 other breakout players. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.